Why Japan doesn't hate America. For Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 78 years ago, U.S.-Japan relations were extremely bad. On August 6, 1945, the U.S. dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Nagasaki suffered the same fate. The bombings led to 200,000 casualties. 4 years earlier, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor had thrust the U.S. into World War II. Today, the dynamics have drastically changed. 84% of Japanese feel close to the U.S. 87% of Americans have a favorable view of Japan. The reconciliation happened for several reasons. 1. Japan grappled with its own sense of guilt. In 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. 2,403 Americans were killed. 1,178 others were wounded. This thrust the United States into World War II. Japan understood the gravity of starting a conflict with a global power. 2. The U.S. transformed Japan into an anti-communist ally. Japan was under the Allied administration from 1945 to 1952. American occupiers drew lessons from World War I. They chose a positive approach, unlike the harsh one used with Germany. Food was airlifted to prevent famine in the war-torn nation. Emperor Hirohito wasn't prosecuted for war crimes. He remained a symbolic figurehead. The U.S. promoted democracy in Japan. Washington even drafted a democratic constitution for Japan. 3. Japan formed a military alliance with the U.S. In 1952, the U.S. forced Japan to sign a security treaty. It was a requirement to end the occupation. The treaty sparked controversy among the Japanese public. The U.S. could maintain military bases in Japan. Japan couldn't provide bases to other nations without U.S. consent. The U.S. could deploy forces in Japan at will. The treaty didn't obligate the U.S. to defend Japan. In 1960, the agreement was revised. The U.S.-Japan Security Treaty established a genuine military alliance. 4. The U.S. aided Japan's economic recovery. From 1946 to 1952, the U.S. invested $2.2 billion in Japan. The U.S. helped rebuild Japan's war-damaged infrastructure. It promoted education and cultural exchange. It also opened its markets to Japanese goods. In the 1960s, Japan witnessed a remarkable recovery. Post-war living standards improved by 25%. Industrial growth reached unprecedented levels. National income doubled every 10 years. 5. Japan was relieved of financial contributions. Before the 1960 treaty, Japan financially supported U.S. bases in the country. Japan was paying $30 million annually. This was a great burden for a recovering nation. The 1960 treaty relieved Japan of this responsibility. The U.S. took on a larger share of the expenses. 6. Japan chose cooperation over confrontation. Japan allied with the U.S. during the Cold War and beyond. Both countries belonged to the Western Bloc. Both wanted to contain communism in Asia. Tokyo still avoids talking about nuclear bombings and compensation. Surveys indicate that 60% of the Japanese public wants an apology, but government and public interests don't always align.